Ritalin is to unemployment as Adderall is to early retirement. I started taking Adderall the year it came onto the market, I believe in 1997, and immediately loved it. If you haven't taken Adderall before, take your average day, then add joy. It is a prescription drug though, so you do need a handgun. There's a lot of people saying, well, I don't need Adderall to perform, and that's true. You also don't need hands to play the piano, but I don't think there's anybody in the New York Philharmonic using stumps. If you're not going to use performance-enhancing drugs, go across the board and don't use glasses. Those are vision-enhancing products. You know, otherwise it seems a little hypocritical to partake in some medical discovery and not others. What are you, Amish? Where you use some technology but not other technologies? Adderall is the best performance-enhancing drug in the world. There was a movie called Limitless that came out with Bradley Cooper. Limitless was about the main character Bradley Cooper, who was a writer who had a lack of ambition and writer's block, and he came across some drug that made everything perfect. His life just seamlessly came together. His writing came together. He was more sociable. The funny thing is, you know how Google auto-completes stuff? I typed in Limitless is about and hit enter, and it accidentally, without my knowledge, auto-completed Adderall. Limitless is about Adderall. That's what it auto-completed. So if you haven't tried Adderall, it's basically the drug in Limitless. It allows you to achieve anything you want to. A lot of people tell me, well, Dan, I don't know how to draw. I'm never going to be able to draw. I could teach you how to draw. I'll give you some examples. These are some of my drawings. I never went to art school. I didn't take art lessons. I just started taking Adderall and drawing, and these are the images I drew.
This one is single point perspective graphic design. The difficulty in this one was it's single point perspective, but I had to accommodate to make it look like a fisheye lens. So I adjusted and warped the angle of the buildings. So if you look at the buildings on the bottom left corner, that's where the vanishing point is, where my name's vanishing point is. But if you look at the buildings in green on the top right corner, you almost see them as equally high as you. So the difficulty in this one was not foreshortening or perspective. It was trying to synthetically create a fisheye look. This one is one of my favorites, even though it's simple. It's just a self-portrait, a sketch. My favorite medium, graphite on paper. You can sense motion in it. This one is done in a couple different types of media, from colored pencil to marker. My objective here was to use incorrect colors with the correct tone, meaning if you turn this picture into a black and white picture, it would still have all the dimensions and correct shading, even though the hairline that I used has blue hints, and obviously I don't have blue hair. I also really like the way the eyes came out on this one, and the reflection of the light off the lens. Here's another self-portrait. This one's in colored pencil on a middle tone paper, not white, not black, a middle tone paper. This is just me doing stand-up. This is another graphic design that's in a graffiti style. This is probably my favorite one because it has perspective and depth to it, but the letters are hollowed out. So I spell my name in the absence of substance. And if you notice, I drew in shadows on the paper to make it look like it's coming off the page. Also to make it look like it's coming off the page, I know it looks like lined paper, but it's not lined paper. I drew that in. Notice how my name, the lines don't show through my name whatsoever. Everything was done in the design to make it seem like the letters are coming off of the paper. The shadow from the D, the lines that don't go through the letter on paper that's not lined. And if you're wondering what it says the New York Times Arts Review declined to comment, stating, "This is Will Phillips. I think you have the wrong email. Enigmatically unknown and overrated." Then in the T it says serial anonymity, meaning I've put out a couple of specials and I'm still anonymous. This self-portrait I really love. The reason it works so well is that there's actually foreshortening in his eyes. This is almost a fisheye lens look too, where the front eye, the eye that's ahead of you, is a decent size bigger than the eye behind it. And I also made it so it's blurrier as you move further away from that eye, that cheek, that nose part. So it gives more of a photographic feeling to a mixed media drawing, mostly colored pencil. This one I got the most praise for. This is actually graphite on white paper. It's photographic realism or even hyperrealism. This is actually one of the first drawings I ever did, and the reason it looks this way is, for one, because I took a lot of time, and for two, because Adderall just figured out the solution to make it look good. This is another early on graphite on watercolor paper, so you see the texture of the paper. It looks a little ripped up and mismanaged, but this is actually a hip-hop group I grew up listening to called Camp Low. This one actually got a decent amount of praise. It was in the newspaper twice, and then it was hung in the Everson Museum of Art for a while in Syracuse, New York. The idea for it came from Adderall, and I wanted to create a colored pencil piece where I use a variety, as many colors as possible, but in the correct tone or shade. So if you take a rainbow of colors and shade them differently and then photocopy them in black and white, it looks photorealistic, but when you put it back into color, it looks elaborately bright. And the last one I have is ink on paper. It is a lakescape. I'm trying to look for like that perfect time as the sun's going down and trying to go for photorealism.
I'm not recommending taking it recreationally. Use it for productivity. And people say, the big myth about Adderall is that if you have ADHD, Adderall is for you and it functions a certain way. But if you don't have ADHD or ADD, it's bad for you. And that's not the truth at all. Because if you look at psychiatry, they use the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's called the DSM. And how do they gauge whether or not a patient is supposed to be on whatever psychiatric drugs, pharmaceuticals they're supposed to be on? It's basically self-inventory. They ask you questions about your life, you answer a certain way, and they prescribe you certain drugs. So whether or not you take Adderall, it affects you no differently than people who have ADHD. Everybody's on the spectrum. It's a stimulant to everybody. Some people don't like the effect of Adderall. Other people like the effect of Adderall, but there's no black and white ADHD effect and a non-ADHD effect. Adderall creates productivity across the board for everybody. The reason I can tell you there's no biochemical distinction between the people taking Adderall and not is because psychiatrists don't deal with blood work or check your synapses for neurotransmitters. There's no defined chemical test that makes a distinction between people who have attention deficit disorder and those who don't. And biochemically, we're all pretty much comprised of the same thing. So Adderall treats people with ADHD, whatever category that is, the same way it does everybody else. It's almost the same as identity politics. Oh, I'm part of this group, you're part of that group. No, we're all on the spectrum. Everybody has some level of attention deficit disorder. You get bored at specific things. If you want to know the truth, Good Will Hunting was on Adderall. That's how he solved all those math problems. You know who could have used Adderall? Leonardo da Vinci. He didn't finish any of his projects. If you want to know the truth, Adderall is like crystal meth without all the danger and side effects. It's just a stimulant. It's an amphetamine. If you get a generic bottle of Adderall, it actually says amphetamines on it. It's a stimulant. That's what it is. Just like crystal meth, except you eat it in smaller doses so it's safer, but it encourages you to accomplish things. There's no definitive test in psychiatry for attention deficit disorder, which is supposedly what warrants a prescription to Adderall. It's basically self-inventory. They ask you questions about yourself. If you tell them you're having trouble focusing, that's the test. It should just be a quick yes or no test. In psychiatry, are you Nikola Tesla? If you answer no, then you should probably be on Adderall. I'm making the distinction between Adderall and Ritalin. Adderall is perfect. Ritalin sucks. I'll give you a list of things better than Ritalin. Attention deficit, Jonestown, dropping out of school, a school bus fire, illiteracy, unattended testicular torsion, ocular paper cuts, church, minimum wage, minimum mandatory sentencing, racism towards white people, your mother, athlete's foot, Bernie Madoff, Tampa Bay homelessness, prison sex trains, this video, a wish you were blind date, unconsummated Viagra usage, naming the aborted, 9/12/2001, a double botched laser eye surgery, back hair, and eHarmony. Those are all things better than Ritalin. They're called performance enhancing drugs for a reason. Why not experiment with them? Lance Armstrong won the Tour de France 7 times. He raised $500 million for cancer research due to performance enhancing drugs. And some people look at that as like, oh, what a failure. No, the fact of the matter is he still put in the work. He still rode his bike 52 hours a day, 9 days a week, fucking 14 months out of the year, non-stop, training to win the Tour de France. It's not like the drugs made him win. It's his work ethic. The drugs just enhanced his performance. And if you're not getting tested for drugs in the workplace, why not use performance enhancing drugs? Performance, I'll give you a definition. Performance, the execution of an action, any human endeavor. Literally participating in existence is performance. Enhancement, to raise to a higher degree, advance, or increase in value. Why would you not increase in value your existence? Performance enhancing. Oh, I don't use drugs. Neither does Donald Trump, and he grabs women. I'm such an advocate for Adderall that I wrote an 8-page blog on Adderall itself, which I'm going to read to you now. The Unauthorized Guide to Adderall Abuse. You have in front of you at this very moment an unlimited informational resource at your fingertips, your computer, which is undoubtedly a veritable font of misinformation and ill-informed anecdotes perpetuated as truths about a misunderstood pharmaceutical gem known as Adderall. It's imperative that we dispose of the regurgitated sewage circulating about this drug. To do so, a pivotal piece of logic needs to surface, and that is that there is little to no actual standardized scientific research about the neurological ramifications concerning the consumption of this drug, despite the unfounded, pervasive claims that are certain to pop up even in response to this article. None of this information, including my own, should be taken as fact. The field of psychopharmacology is a toxic and decidedly uncontrolled shotgun of assumptions that somehow masquerade as packaged facts that are easy and amusing to pass on to others as a point of marginal social entertainment. The father of Adderall, generically referred to as amphetamine salts, the manufacturer, the people with the money, the only entity legally responsible for having a clear understanding of how this medication works, says it may help to increase the ability to pay attention, stay focused, and control behavioral problems. That is literally the entire depth of understanding as to the dispositional fallout regarding this medication. Read the entire body of literature from Teva, Bar Pharmaceuticals, any other licensed manufacturer, or the FDA, and you will find an endless body of vague pharmacokinetic circumlocution amounting to a conspicuous absence of information in between swallowing the pills and pissing them into the waste stream. If you are looking for hypotheticals, testimonials, and statistics about Adderall, feel free to peruse the social ether. This is intended to be a 17-year, I guess it would be 22nd year now, personal account and an accurate assessment of the drug and its potential. No accountable information should be taken as gospel. Statistically speaking, your doctor or licensed medical practitioner probably knows very little about the drug, its effects, and the interactional dangers regarding this medication. This is not a patronizing attempt to discount their professional opinion. It's a glaring certainty that not only are these professionals spread thin to accommodate the psychological spectrum needed to sustain their livelihood in psychiatry, but more importantly, the foundation of this practice is based on the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatry, which is statistics, basically, numbers. And with regard to this, adult ADD is found in roughly 6% of the population, which means that you have a 1 in 18 chance of finding a practitioner who has personal experience with the drug, meaning most psychiatrists prescribing Adderall for attention deficit disorder do not take the drug. They do not have any personal experience with the drug. Personal experience needs to be held in high regard to the obvious medical assumptions by the entire field of psychopharmacology. And before I get harassed about any of these objectionable assertions, let me remind you that the manufacturers of Adderall inform the doctors about their product and their research, which is in turn relayed to you, the patient. And when you go to the source, the pharmaceutical manufacturers making amphetamine salts, the generic name for Adderall, they say Adderall may increase the ability to pay attention. May. Meaning they don't know whether or not Adderall helps to increase attention because you can't test neurotransmitters being exchanged between synapses in the brain of a patient. Adderall may help to increase the ability to pay attention. The end. That's all. Il fine. This is because modern science is currently incapable of testing these mood-altering medications regarding the assumed effects. There is no scientific test to see if the serotonin in a synapse has been reabsorbed by the same nerve that delivered that very neurotransmitter due to your prescribed SSRI, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which is a fancy name for an antidepressant. They can't test for it. The same scientific ignorance applies to Adderall. If anyone has been through a prolonged psychological interrogation without the hazards of laces in their sneakers, because they take out your shoelaces so you don't hang yourself when you get institutionalized, not that I would know twice from personal experience, they will endure the extent to which the World Health Organization is capable of testing an individual with regard to the medical field of psychiatry. Most individuals who are mentally unhinged to warrant that type of treatment are not grounded enough to digest and analyze this testing for what it is, a prolonged journey of self-diagnosis. Not a blood test, meaning you're diagnosing yourself by answering the psychiatrist's questions. Are you hearing voices? What time do you go to bed? What are your sleep habits? How did this make you feel? Do you still feel the same way? Input data into a statistical manual of people who also underwent self-analysis, and out comes a diagnosis. It sounds like there's a bird in my house and it's bugging the shit out of me. Input data into the statistical manual of people who also underwent self-analysis, and out comes a diagnosis. You will never get a blood test showing the presence or absence of a single one of the hundreds of mental disorders medically billed and treated by the healthcare industry. Point blank, your diagnosis is a guess. Your treatment is a guess, an educated guess, and it's clearly time to take your emotional and mental health into your own hand. That's not a call to rob pharmacies and take Cymbalta suppositories. It's an assertion that your mental health is best understood through continual, practical self-analysis. Here's some of the bullshit rhetoric you will find regarding Adderall under the guise of medical fact and repeated by the ignorant in a trickle-down effect until it's broadcasted by an AM disc jockey attempting to be informed. And yes, I do realize that it is on the very same label that I told you that they think this medication could possibly sort of help someone maybe pay attention, we think, and stuff. That's what the pharmaceutical industry is saying. So everybody's opinion is fair game, including my own. And I would call myself an expert, having taken it for 24 years now. Adderall is a medication used to treat ADD and ADHD, neither of which is scientifically testable, nor is a single person certain as to how it's affecting your neurological biochemistry. For all we know, this drug was created by a team of scientists trying to synthesize a profitable weight loss drug. To be honest, that's what I think they were actually attempting to do. By the very same logic of numbers, statistical evidence suggests that due to the growing diagnosis and the apparent widespread abuse that exists, statistically, a much larger audience is experiencing an improved quality of life as well. Adderall is widely known as the study drug and likened to the effects of a genius pill in the movie Limitless. As I spoke about earlier, I didn't realize it was part of the blog. The reason these assertions are so prevalent is because by the very same math used to prescribe this pill, you will find that almost everyone who consumes a small to moderate dose of this medication feels as though they can accomplish beyond what they thought was cognitively possible. Statistically, whether or not you have ADD or ADHD, you will find that Adderall makes you more alert, more productive, responsible, clear-headed, rational, competent. You will find that you have access to more intellectual and academic leverage, the high of a mild euphoria in moderate doses.